working. It's either working or I'm dead. I've been shot in other arenas. This is not the only one. So, but again, I want to welcome all of you here at our town hall meeting. It's a pleasure for me to give you a little bit of the history. I've been involved with SAISSA since '84. Before it was SAISSA. And I've been here since 43. That's not 1843. Norm, I saw you going to 18, but it's 1943. My family moved here when I was 6 months old. We lived at the north end of the island. We lost 2 houses in incident storms. One of them we were still in at the time when the storm came. So I've had some experience over the years here with this. In fact, Charles Frazier got me to move over here when he bought the island, and I've been working with him and the plantation for this many years. So we've certainly been involved in trying to save Amelia Island. And SAISSA, it's about people. It's about people like you, your neighbors, and it really is a tribute to a lot of people besides me that caused this to happen. In the early days, there was a guy named Fran Wright who was a naval architect from Annapolis. He also started the Fernandina Arts Collaborative downtown. He was a great artist. His genre was watercolors and chalk, and he did magnificent work. I accused him of being too narrow-minded, though, because if you only design navals, you can't be much of a person. But anyway, we got through that. He started the collaborative with all the people that worked, that lived along the beach, all the different condominium associations, and he got kind of the thing started. And then the AIPCA was very active, very involved in how we got everything done. There was a fellow named Dan Bierman who was the AIPCA fellow in charge of beaches. And I can remember back in the 80s whenever we were about to lose the beach club. It was on a precipice about to wash away, and we got in a fellow named Perry Brune who came in from Gainesville. He was a professor there, and he gave us a permit. His permit, he took a legal pad and drew one line this way, one line that way, wrote 3-1 on it, and I took that to Tallahassee and got a permit to put bulldozers on the beach to push sand up to save the beach club. Dan Bierman was on we had to truck in sand for a period of time there too, and so Dan was out there in sub-freezing temperatures with a stocking cap on, checking in. There's some 90 trucks of sand we had to bring in to save this island. We had issues over the years, many issues. Before SAISSA, we were about to lose Windsong in '92, and Windsong was on a precipice 17 feet from the beach, 17 feet up in the air, and there was a cliff. And we were putting sheet pilings out there in the middle of the night, and a fellow named Mike Luke was head of that association, and they didn't have a chance to meet to get things done, to get it organized. So he and Jack Heelan, then the general manager for the plantation, Mike Luke says, "I'll pay for it, get it done." And Jack Heelan said, "No, you won't, I'll pay for it." And I said, "Y'all quit arguing, both of you will pay for it, let's get it done." So sheet piling's still there in front of Windsong, and they're some 17 feet tall. You would not know that when you're there now. Over time, too, we had to put up sandbags. These were called geotubes. They were 8 inches in diameter, and we made a deal with the state. If we put them in, then we'll take them out whenever we do the renourishment. Well, they compromised with us later, and we only had to take out half of them after we did the renourishment. So many of those are still in the ground. A fellow like Morgan Roseborough, who was a retired brigadier general, he was also the AIPCA's fellow in charge of beaches, and we had a problem with the Corps. I was able to negotiate on behalf of Governor Graham a memorandum of understanding with the Navy that whenever they're dredging for Kings Bay, that they would put that sand on the north end of Amelia Island, and if we got the state to pay half the cost, we would move it down and utilize it in front of the plantation all the way down the whole island and do that. Well, we had a little problem because the Corps guys that were supposed to be doing all this, they went on vacation, 2 of them, and the sand never got to Amelia Island. It got to where where Long Point is now, but that's as far as it got. So and I'm sorry, to Ocean Club. It got to where the Ocean Club is. So that's, and the reason it didn't is because nobody was watching the store. They were not surveying the beach, and these two Corps guys let the dredger get the benefit of taking his word for what he was doing, and he wasn't doing it. So Morgan Roseborough went to Washington, and the ombudsman for the Department of the Army, he got those guys fired for what they did. So Morgan was a great help to us. A thing called the Nassau County Soil Conservation Board, they sponsored us on several things that we did to get money from the legislature. They also were the sponsor of our first Renourishment effort, because Nassau County wouldn't do it because they were mad at us because we got driving off the beach. So they wouldn't be our sponsor. In fact, we wanted to get a D9 here. Ron Kohler remembers this. They wouldn't bring us a D9 to put sand up to save buildings. They charge us rent. So that's what we did. And so along came a guy named Tom Ford, who was a modestly shaped fellow, weighed 550 pounds, from Callahan. And he got the Nassau County Soil and Conservation Board to sponsor our project. And after a while, the county commission caught on, and they became jealous because these people were actually helping us, and they knew they should have been doing it. So that was part of our early history with things like that going on. Ed McCabe was president of the AIPCA. Then he became president of SAISSA. The first president was Jack Heelan. Jack Heelan is one of the heroes, really, of saving the beach here. When he was the manager, he devoted all the resources that he could put at his hand on behalf of the Mee Island Company to help save the beach. So he was a large part of that. There are many people over the years. Mary Brannon, who was first president of the AIPCA, first woman president, she became our president and did a great job after Ed McCabe. And then after her, we had Bob Martin. And now we have this wonderful fellow over here who missed the meeting, and he got elected chairman. So we've really appreciated having Drew Wallace. So SAISSA is all about people. It's all about you, your neighbors, your predecessors. Those are the people that made this a success. And it's been a remarkable success. After the first Renourishment, we got a statewide award for being the most outstanding project in Florida. And now we are the model, not just in Florida, but in other states. People come and want to know, how'd you do this? How'd it work? Because it has a remarkable, remarkable success because of people like you, and I often say in spite of people like me. So it's worked out very, very well. We just want to close a minute, and we'll want to read a poem to you. Poetry is a terrible habit of mine. When I'm nervous or upset, if you're going to have to speak somewhere, and I'm not quite sure what I'm going to say or do, I write a poem. And I've done that for jury closings. I've done it to testify on behalf of the arts in Washington. And that's the thing I do. I don't know why I do it, but I do it. And not necessarily it's any good, but I do it. And so whenever we were trying to sell the South End Park to the state of Florida, and the governor then, of course, was Bob Graham, and we were on the agenda to be sold. Well, there was a Speaker of the House friend of mine named Herb Morgan who shows up, and he tells me, buddy, I just want you to know I'm going to tell them to shut down this program and not buy the south end of Mee Island for $8 million because this is a waste of public money to save beaches. And so he got to speak ahead of me because he's the Speaker of the House. So I'm sitting there, what am I going to say to that? That's going to be really interesting. So, and he was going to tell them that as Speaker of the House, he's going to cut off all the money for beach renourishment, for preserving beaches, because he's from Tallahassee, Florida. They don't have any beaches in Tallahassee. So he was going to speak ahead of me. And so I'm sitting there scribbling out on a piece of paper, and this is what I wrote, and if you don't mind, I'll share it with you. And this is about the south end of a Mee Island, or saving the south end of a Mee Island. What a joy and indeed a pleasure to seize the moment to save the treasure. For it's not what rogues and pirates have left, but it was Florida that God blessed. All who stand before you today applaud each of you and say, destiny begins and begs that we do not sway. Save our coast, please, we pray. Amelia Island is the diamond in Florida's crown. Its beauties indescribable, but richly abound. The beaches, wildlife, estuaries, such a majestic view. If somehow you can save our water so blue, our children's children will whisper, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I thank you for listening to me. Okay. Okay.
Let me go first. They've put up an obstacle course on the back of this stage for these old timers to get through. And I'm one of those. I forgot to introduce myself. Actually, I'm Drew Wallace. I did forget to say that before I introduced Buddy. I know a lot of you, and that's probably why I kind of slipped my mind thinking that you knew who the heck I really was. But anyway, before we get into the meat of this, I want to introduce some people that have devoted a lot of time and energy to get where we are with SAISSA so far this year. First of all, I want to introduce Al Broder. Al is a vice president and principal of Olson Associates, a very leading top-grade coastal engineering firm, and has been involved with the SAISSA project since, I believe, 2011, which was our last Renourishment. And Al's been involved at that time, and he comes to all our board meetings and talks to us a lot about stuff that we really don't understand. And then we have to ask him lots of stupid questions because he is an engineer. He's very detail-oriented. So you're going to hear from Al later, and he's got some really interesting things. They've done some innovative approaches to this renourishment and the search for sand. Sand is a rare commodity in the world today, and Al has devised a way to perhaps have a continuous flow of sand for future renourishment. So please pay attention when he gets to that particular part of his talk. We also have Bill Moore. Now, I know everybody knows Bill. Bill's been here, I can't again say forever, but for a long, long time, certainly involved with SAISSA from day one, 93, probably was on the beach pushing sand up the Windsong back in those days. But Bill knows it's beyond everything that there even is a need to know as it relates to SAISSA. He is our project manager. He comes to all our meetings. We operate under the sunshine laws of the state of Florida, so I can't call Peter Kelly and ask him a question and talk about a subject because there's two of us involved in perhaps obtaining information regarding making a decision. So what we have to do is that I have to call Bill and say, Bill, Peter, by the way, is the vice president. Bill, please talk to Peter and tell him that I need to know and what does he think. So we go through Bill because we do not want to violate, and we try very hard not to violate the Florida sunshine laws. But again, that's just one thing that Bill does, is act kind of like a conduit for all the questions that we have. Okay, so that's Bill. We have Al. We've heard from Buddy. Now we have the board. I'm just going to start right here because this is the way the board is. We have Kelly Allen, who's an AIPCA representative. Wait, maybe I could do this. Let me see if this works. That's our topics. We kind of know what our topics are. We don't have to go through that. We're going to talk about the beach. Purpose. Actually, that is important. I was going to skip over that, but that is important because there may be some people think that we do something other than that. This is it. This is all we do. And we do this to protect the market value of your houses and your condos and your vacant lots. That's what we do. We protect, preserve, and restore the beach. Okay. So and some of you have been to all these meetings before. You've seen that chart. But now we're going to put some people in the little boxes. So, and again, the numbers, as I had mentioned previously, relate to the number like trustees 11, that's the total. AIPCA 7, that relates to the beach frontage square distance of sand in front of the AIPCA properties. Riverstone has 1, Sanctuary has 1, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't have everybody here from the board, but for what we do, we have Kelly Allen, who is the Omni representative and an AIPCA representative. We have Mary Axtell. You could stand. So that everybody knows who you are. Because these are the people you can ask questions to also, because they're very involved. Mary is in charge of our communications committee. She's the one that put together that package that you received in the mail and has done many, many other things. If you haven't received it in the mail, talk to Mary and she'll make sure you get one. Okay, and then we have, we'll skip that chair. And then we have George Dejanowski, who's an AIPCA member. And then we have Peter Kelly, who's, by the way, George is our secretary. Peter Kelly is our vice president, AIPCA representative. And Kendall, the retreat representative. And we have Jim Raycraft, which is an AIPCA representative. So those are the board members that we have. We have Norm Ledwig. Norm is a member of the Communications Committee. As I said, we do lots of work on the Communications Committee, and we need outside help. And Norm has been very, very involved and very appreciative of his services over the last 6 months as we work towards getting all this kind of stuff out to you. So those are our board members. The other people are just not here, but they are real people. There's one thing that, this is the organization of SAISSA, but again, it's important to remember that we are the project manager for the restoration and renourishment of the beach for the county. We prepare the budget, and the county approves the budget. We adhere to all the county's rules and regulations and ordinances as it relates to bidding for vendors and sunshine laws that I talked about. So we are the project manager for SAISSA's activities for the county. It's the county that makes all the final decisions. They're the ones that gets the bid, the vendor bid. When we start talking later about going out for bid, they're the ones that do that. They're the ones that do the financing bid. So again, it's important to realize that we're kind of like the project manager for this project. Okay. Okay, that's actually his slide. So I think I'm done for now, which obviously there wasn't a lot to what I just said in time. But I will be back after Al, and then we're going to get into the meat of what you received in the mail and some background as to why, again, we're doing what we're doing. So I'm going to start with this slide. I think this is yours, right? Okay, thank you. Here's Al. Here's your slide. Don't fall.
Let's do a little do-si-do here, and try not to fall off the back of the stage. Good morning. Again, I'm Al Browder. I work with Olson Associates. Our principal engineer, Eric Olson, has been involved with this project for decades, back to the 80s with Buddy and Bill Moore. I've had the pleasure of working on this project for probably the last 15 years or so. Buddy did a really great job of setting the groundwork for how we got to this point, and I'm going to pick it up here with some of the beach conditions that led to the conclusion and the need that we needed to do something more comprehensive. These are a few images here from the Thanksgiving Day storm in 1984, there on the left. And then again, 10 years, 8 or 9 years later, with the series of nor'easters that we experienced in 1992 and 1993. South end of the island has historically been an eroding coastline. And as development has increased, those two things have come into conflict with each other. A lot of effort was taken in the 80s. Buddy mentioned to truck in sand, to scrape the beach, to rebuild dunes. These were all very localized efforts that really did a great job at the time, but were not of a large enough scale to really have the lasting impact that was really necessary to offset the erosion. You can see here sort of the scale of the problem, but he mentioned the windsong. Windsong's dune features had been so severely eroded that by 1992 and 93, it was necessary to install some steel sheet pile. Well, they couldn't install steel sheet pile along the entire 3 miles of the beach there. They also installed some geotubes, which I'm not sure you can make out in this picture, but these were the conditions that were beginning to occur more and more frequently in the 80s and 90s, and it became apparent that a much more comprehensive approach was going to be necessary. And that is what prompted the formation of SAISSA in 1993, again with the intent to protect and restore and maintain the beaches here at South Amelia Island. Just a little bit of a road map. Hopefully we all know where we are today. We managed to get here in one piece, so we're all in good shape. Amelia Island has 13 miles of Atlantic Ocean shoreline, and down here at the south end, we are very interested in the southern 3.6 miles. The island itself sits in between two very large tidal inlets, that being the St. Mary's entrance up in Fernandina and then Nassau Sound here at the south end. These two tidal entrances play a very big role in how the beach behaves on a year-to-year basis and on a long-term basis. But also the natural setting offshore, the wave climate in which we live, the shape of the island and the shape of the offshore bathymetry has a lot to do with what parts of the island erode and what parts of the island typically accrete. Center of the island, those lucky folks, have a fairly stable shoreline, whereas the north end and the south end, particularly our piece of the world here, suffer very chronic and in some places very severe erosion. But this is our roadmap. We're going to talk a little bit in particular about Nassau Sound. It plays a very important role in what we do and where we get our sand for our projects. And again, to scale it off, out of 13 miles, the SAISSA portion of the beach is 3 miles from Burney Park south to that detached rock breakwater you see down there near the park where everybody goes to fish. And then the Florida Park Service actually manages another half mile, 0.6 miles, south of that breakwater down to the tip of the island. They are a partner with us in this project. They are a co-permittee and one of our very good friends in developing and maintaining the beaches here, and I'll talk about that a little bit as we go on. I'm up here to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts. There aren't any equations in this presentation, so despite what Drew said, I'll get you through it here this morning. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of how we do what we do and why we build the beach in the way we do. And you'll hear me mention beach profiles an awful lot. Beach profiles are actually surveys. You've probably seen our survey crews out here every spring or summer surveying the beach. They take transects across the beach every 1,000 feet. These little stripes across the beach there. They're not actually printed on the beach, so you can't go out there and find them. But these are surveys we run from the back sides of the dunes out across the dry beach and out into the water. They go way out into the water, out to maybe 30 feet deep. And we have to survey out that far because your active beach extends out that far. There's more active beach out in the water that you can't see than what you can actually see up on the dry beach. And it's very similar to the foundation of your house. If you don't protect the foundation of your house, you can't expect the part that's up out of the ground to do very well. So we keep track of it all, typically from the dunes out to at least 20 feet, probably out to 30 feet in some places. So if you imagine that red line as a slice through a loaf of bread, if the whole beach is a loaf of bread and we want to just take one piece and stand it up on edge and take a look at it, it kind of looks like this. Now, I have to say, this is an exaggerated graph. I have taken my slice of bread through the beach, and I have stretched it vertically. Otherwise, the whole graph would be so flat, you never see anything. But this is a depiction of the beach profile in 1994. You saw the pictures from Windsong and the golf course and everywhere else, what the conditions were like before SAISSA got started and the first restoration was in place. You can see here we have a high back dune here around, this is kind of very near Windsong actually, vegetated, that's where all the houses and condominium complexes were. But you can also see here, or maybe you can't, the steep dune face. I've kind of given away the lead a little bit. The very steep dune face that was in that picture, that's where a sheet pile was placed in 1993. That's where the geotubes were installed to protect the dunes. But obviously, if we want to do something more comprehensive, the decision was made by SAISSA to take on beach nourishment. And this is the placement of large volumes of sand, not just truckloads, but bringing in a dredge, placing millions of cubic yards on the beach, maybe 100 to 150 cubic yards per foot of the beach for 3 miles. So when we do that, what are we doing? We're not just dumping sand on the beach in some randomly chosen pile. There is a method to the madness, and I wanted to step through that here. So when you look at what is actually built, and if you've been around and seen one or two of these projects go in, you'll see the dredge pumping sand on the beach and the bulldozers shaping it. When we first did this in 1994, they did push sand up and restore the dunes up along that dune scarp that you saw in the pictures earlier. Well, there's really two fundamental pieces to that big pile of sand that's been dumped on the beach. And the first pile, so we'll call it, I like to think of it in a little more romantic way than that, is called the design beach. we know from that eroded condition that we saw on the beach, there's a certain volume and geometry of sand we want to put on the beach that we always want to have there. It's our line in the sand. We want to make sure that the beach is at least a certain width and a certain height in front of all the properties so that when a very large storm event impacts the beach, and I'm talking a real bad hurricane type of event, that there's enough sand in front of all the infrastructure to take the hit, to absorb that blow and protect the upland infrastructure. So that's what we call the design beach. That's the first part of the giant sand pile. The second part, the seaward part of that, we place out in front of our design beach to actually protect our design beach over the life of our renourishment cycle. We call that the advance fill. We call it advance. It's kind of like an advance on a paycheck. We know that the beach is going to erode over time. We are placing what we call a soft solution through beach nourishment, replacing sand. We can predict through historical records how much sand is going to erode off the beach each year. We can calculate in our economic methods how many years we would like to go between bringing a dredge to town. It costs a lot of money to bring the dredge here. So we know how much we want him to place each time that dredge shows up. So we ask him to place initially our design beach volume and then our advanced fill volume. The first time we did this, that was 2.6 million cubic yards. It's hundreds of thousands of dump truck loads worth of sand. But he rebuilt the dunes, rebuilt the design beach, and then he built our first advanced fill. Now that is intended to erode over time, as I mentioned, and we can predict how much it should erode each year. So if we watch the project evolve and we survey it every year on those beach profiles, we will see it evolve. This is sort of the example of what happens in the first year. If you were here, you'll see a big change in the beach. The first year as the beach equilibrates. We survey it. We keep track of where the sand is going. We follow it through the years. We actually survey it every year. I didn't put every curve on here. I don't want to drag this out too long. But as we progress through the years and we get to years 8, 9, 10, and so on, we see that we are getting very close to our design beach condition. The beach is at the width that we always want to maintain, and we never want to let it get any worse than that. We want to protect those upper dunes. Again, we are designing to have something in place throughout an entire 10-year cycle that will protect the upland infrastructure from the big one, to protect pool decks, structures, actual foundations of condos and homes. So typically, this is a kind of a standard number around here. When you get to 8, 9, 10 years, you're starting to think about renourishment. When you get to 10 or somewhere thereabouts, you are looking to bring in the dredge again and replenish the advanced fill volume, and we will start the project over. We run through these economic calculations. We determine what the renourishment interval is. We can compare it to other options we may have had for beach restoration and protection. This becomes the most cost-effective and efficient means of proceeding to protect the beach. This is what happens on every project around the state of Florida. They go through similar analyses depending on their climate and determine what is the best beach management tool for them. Here, back in the early 1990s, SAISSA went through this process and elected to take on this process of beach nourishment with periodic maintenance renourishment. So you can think of this sort of as a circular drawing. We had a circular drawing in here earlier in this version of this. Every 8, 9, 10 years or so, we will be back performing a maintenance renourishment, and we are now approaching that time. For those of you who have been here, you've seen this in action, the bulldozers, the dredge parked offshore. These are just some of the shots from previous projects. Again, our first nourishment was in 1994. This is a post-construction shot. Looks kind of like an airport runway when they built a very, very wide berm because they needed to replace that design beach and they needed to build our first advanced fill. If you can see, just barely make out the dunes that were pushed up in the back here. But you also notice no vegetation. There was no immediate vegetation plan in 1994, but very quickly vegetation began to grow on its own. You take the reverse picture here from 2011, you can see how much of the vegetation had grown over the years. And then when they were building our second maintenance renourishment, this is the process when they were widening the beach from south to north. These are just some of the action shots here during construction. The two dredges that were parked offshore, these are cutter head dredges that were dredging sand from Nassau Sound. I'll talk about that in here in just a minute, about where we get the sand from. But I believe you're probably all pretty familiar with beach nourishment. Anybody who lives at the beach in Florida becomes more and more aware of what the beach nourishment process is. Over the life of the project since 1994, it has become very, very apparent that the erosion rates at the very south end of the project, I'm talking primarily in Amelia Island State Park, those rates are too high to be managed by beach nourishment alone. The sand would erode too quickly, and we would be required to bring that dredge back too often at too high of a price tag to cost effectively manage the project there. So in 2002, 2001, we began the process of studying some structural stabilization options to slow that erosion rate at the south end of our project, again, principally on Amelia Island State Park's property. In 2004, the Park Service themselves received a grant, a lot of assistance from Buddy and the folks at SAISSA to do this, to build a 1,600-foot-long terminal groin made out of rock at the tip of the island. This is a very low, porous structure intended to allow sand to pass through it, but slow down the erosion rate. It's buried now, if you've been down there recently. It stays buried in the sand pretty effectively. And then we also built a detached breakwater up near the boundary with the park. The combination of these two structures has been very effective in reclaiming land on park property. They've reclaimed about 65 acres that wasn't there in 2000, 2001. And it has also done a great service to the SAISSA portion of the fill as well. It serves as an excellent backstop, if you want to think of it that way. It slows down the erosion rate off the south end of the SAISSA fill as well. So it's been a great synergistic effort to kind of slow down the erosion rate and allow us to keep on that manageable renourishment cycle that we're shooting for. Keep dragging my buttons over the podium. Okay, obviously I'm talking about a lot of sand, hundreds of thousands of dump truck loads worth of sand if they were to bring it in by truck, that have been placed here since 1994. I think the number is something on the order of 7 to 8 million cubic yards of sand have been placed here between the three projects that SAISSA's built and the dredging that goes on in the intercoastal waterway here, which also gets placed on the park property periodically. That's a lot of sand. Where did we get that from? Where did it all come from? Well, the answer is right down here at the south end of the job near Nassau Sound. Again, big tidal inlet. It is a big storehouse of sand. It actually accumulates sand every year to the tune of 200 or 300,000 yards every year, piling up in the inlet. Most of the sand, if not all of the sand that piles up in that inlet, comes right off of the beaches here. It comes off of Amelia Island, comes off of Little Talbot Island, Big Talbot Island, ends up accumulating in the inlet. In the past three projects, you can see the outlines here from 94 and then 2002 and 2011. We have found suitable sand just offshore the project limits or right along the offshore edges of Nassau Sound, very close to where we want to put it on the beach. It's been a very cost-effective, economical source of sand. The real downside, however, is that it does not refill with the same quality of sediments that you'd like to be able to go back into it and dredge it again. So in each cycle, we're out hunting for sand in some other area. We can go way offshore, and we've poked so many holes that I can't fit them all on a decent-looking map anymore. We've looked all over the place, tried to entertain different ideas to where sand can come from, but you quickly find that the economics of the situation and the quality of the sand drive you right back home here to Nassau Sound. Now, as I mentioned, these have filled in with sand, but every time it's happened, the sand that fills back in is finer and finer and finer. You place it on the beach, it does not last nearly as long, gets back to your renourishment interval, gets back to your wallet, gets back to the economics of beach nourishment. So what we have done this time around is tried to take a different tack with the state of Florida and said, look, we need to find a renewable resource. So we dug back through the archives, we dug up every aerial photograph we could find dating back to the 40s, every survey we could find, and we started focusing on these channels. Nassau Sound, if you're a fisherman or you go through the inlet, you know there are two tidal channels that run through the sound. and they're never in the same place on the same day. They move all over the place historically. We thought, well, okay, they do have a bit of a pattern to them. Maybe we can do the same thing. So what we proposed to the state and what we've gone out and researched is to cut a new tidal channel. It will be a very short-lived tidal channel, so don't get your hopes up that you're going to be fishing in and out of this channel every day. It's not going to last there forever. But what we are attempting to do here is mimic Mother Nature to a certain extent, dredge our sand for our beach fill project out of this new channel, borrow area, pump it on the beach, and then have the process repeat. We know from previous aerial photography and survey that this area was a tidal channel in the past, even 20 years ago or 15 years ago. We dredged the sand out of it. We are highly confident that it will fill back in, and because it is in a very energetic portion of the sound, the only material that will be able to stay there will be the nicer, coarser material. A little bit of the shell fragments you see on the beach, the coarser sand you see on the beach should fill in there. We will avoid the muds and silts that deposit in deep depressions offshore where it's far less energetic. So that's the grand game plan here. It has several benefits, most of which I've already touched on. The biggest one being you get the sand you need. We don't want to gloss over the fact that we are looking for sand. We are no different than any community in the southeastern United States these days. Sand, as Drew mentioned, is a hot commodity for beaches all around the U.S. We are really very keen on developing a reusable source. We don't want to have to go out and poke more holes offshore somewhere else looking for sand in the future. And it's got some other benefits too. When you dredge the seabed, you do have an environmental impact. It does recover, but there's no escaping the fact that you have a little bit of an impact. We'd like to minimize that by not digging new holes everywhere on the seabed. And there is the potential with this borrow area to provide some relief to the stress that affects other areas of the sound. Takes a little bit of the hydraulic load off of Little Talbot Island, just a little bit, not a whole lot. Also can relieve some of the stress on the islands out there. You know, those are called the bird islands. The bird islands is a bit of a misnomer, and I try to tell every person who will listen to me this story. They don't stay in the same place over time. They never have. But under the current situation, they're under a lot of stress from these two existing tidal channels. We hope to relieve a little bit of that. Don't know if it'll happen for sure. Don't know if it'll happen to a great degree. But we do believe that we can take this sand out of the inlet, use it for our purposes, and have it come right back to the inlet, by and large, and help us out not only for this project, but projects in the future. To sort of demonstrate this to the state of Florida, we have to do some numerical modeling, some pretty heavy-duty light dimming numerical models in our office to model how the water flows in and out of Nassau Sound, and then to model what happens if we make this excavation and will there be any adverse impact. We haven't really found any of any significance at this point, so we're pretty confident that this is going to work. The modeling will also allow us to project what will happen to the shoals and the islands around the inlet after we make the cut. So it's a really helpful tool. Its biggest purpose is to satisfy the permitting requirements for the project, to satisfy the state and the Army Corps of Engineers that what we are proposing to do will not have an adverse impact. And I mentioned permits. You just can't sneak out there in the middle of the night and dredge up 2 million yards out of Nassau Sound and dump it on the beach and get away with it. That doesn't happen. So here in this case, and as with all the prior projects, we have to pull 2 specific permits. Florida DEP requires us to get what's called a joint coastal permit, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers also has jurisdiction. We have to get a Department of the Army permit from them. We are well underway under the application process for this. We are bouncing questions and answers back and forth with both agencies. We anticipate that we'll receive our permits in advance of advertising our project for bid. We anticipate that will happen late spring, early summer this year. And before I hand it back over to Drew, I just want to point out the pictures here on the left-hand side of the panel. These were taken just last week with a nor'easter that rolled through. Mr. Bill Moore got out there with his raincoat and helped us out. And it sort of highlights where we are in the cycle. You know, the beach looks pretty nice right now, but we are at the point where it has narrowed through to our design beach, and at conditions at high tide, particularly when there's any wind blowing on shore, you do have some areas where there's not a whole lot of recreational beach. You do start to see, you know, your dunes and your sea oats, your sand fencing starting to be impacted, and that is how the process will continue as we march forward. until the advanced fill renourishment is replaced once again. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Drew. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Al. I told you he would be very interesting, especially when it comes to things like that sand search, that hopefully we will get permission. I have somebody raising a hand. Oh, I'm sorry, I should have said that in the beginning. I would prefer that we wait till the end. We're not going to have a card system. We're going to have a microphone system, and we're going to hand mics out. So if you could just hold it, and we'll refer back to when Al was talking, and we'll kind of go from there. Okay, that was the permits. So where are we? We sent out the package, and in that package is a petition. Under the ordinances of the state of the county of Nassau, Nassau County needs to have petitions signed by in excess of 50% of the property owners here in the SAISSA boundaries in order to proceed with the project. Now, proceeding means going out and getting bids. The numbers that you've all seen, and you're going to see them again, are estimates. So the first thing that we need to do is, of course, get the signed petitions in excess of 50%. Then we will go to the county, and then the county will start the process of bidding on the construction of the vendors, and then they will also start the process of the financing. So that means all that financing stuff that you saw in the information that we mailed to you is all based on estimates. Although there was a lot of time spent on those estimates, I'll tell you why they became a little bit more difficult than in prior years. But based upon estimates, so now we need to get final numbers to go forward. So that's what we need. We need the petition signed so we can go to the county, and the county can do what they're supposed to do. The project, hopefully we will start it in the early spring, the first part of May, and it will go on for about 10 weeks. This is what previous projects have done, and that's what we're going to do. You've seen these numbers. The couple of things, the takeaways. The first number is an estimate. It's Al's firm's estimate, based upon all the renourishments that are going on in the southeast United States, the involvement that he's had with prior renourishments. He's come up with an estimate of $20.5 million. We will say this, that if it's less than $20.5 million, yay, we're going to cheer, because we're going to only have to finance whatever it costs. So that is an awesome result. But we don't know until we go out for bid. However, if it's more than $20.5 million, you're off the hook, because we're only going to spend the maximum of $20.5 million. That means we have to make a decision whether we cut back the project, whether we don't bring as much sand in. We don't know what we're going to do. We've never had this situation, because every time, and there's no wood to knock on here, every time the actual proposal has been less than what the estimate has been. Now, I might jinx us for this coming year, but just so you know. So the other important takeaway from this brief slide is the record number of grants amounts that we're receiving from the feds. This is the first time ever we've gotten FEMA money, and from the county, from the state. That $8 million, it's actually $8+ million, is the most we've ever received. And all these monies, by the time we get into the building of the renourishment, will all be under contract for us. Right now, they're appropriated by the state, agreed to by the feds, and will be contracted well before we get too far into this project. Okay, again, this is before interest and fees. Okay, this is historical. This is to give you an idea of what the assessment has been in the past, what the grant money has been in the past, and where we are now down to 2021. So 94 as you remember what Al said, we built the dune system, or we restored the dune system, probably a better way of stating it. So that required a lot of sand, a lot of assessments. Then we started doing renourishment. And the assessment, again, is basically net of the grants, but it was equal to what it cost in those days to do that. And so you say the total there was $12 million in 02. The total was about $10.5 million in 2011. And here we go up to $20 million in 2021. Well, what's the cause of that difference? Well, unfortunately, it's a very simple answer, and it's called supply and demand. The demand has been ferocious since Sandy. There are a lot of renourishments going out there, not only in the state of Florida, which we're impacted by the equipment that's used, but certainly by the southeast. We get up into South Carolina and Georgia, and as they use the equipment, we don't have it. So there is a tremendous demand for beach renourishment at this point in time. And the supply, Al tells me there's 4 qualified dredgers. Are we still at 4, Al? Still at 4 qualified dredgers to do the work that needs to be done. So that has pushed the cost up. Now, just so you know, we take advantage of the fact that we can do the renourishment during the summer, early summer, during turtle season. And you're all sitting there going, how the heck can we do that? Well, most of the other organizations most of the other beaches have turtles way in excess of our turtle population, and they can't do it. But because we've done it in the past and have the ability, through the people that we work with, is that we move the turtles, we protect the turtles, we do all the things that you're supposed to do so there's no damage done to the turtles. But it enables us to get a bit of a price break on doing it during the early summer months than it does if we had done it at a different time. Some people say we'll do it during the winter. Well, the wave action out there precludes us from having dredgers go out there and try to dig sand off the bottom. You cannot do it in the winter. So again, it's kind of the good news, bad news. The good news is that we can do it in a period of time where we think that the benefit to us is greater than doing it at a different time. So that's the historical, give you an idea. Now, this is going to be just a little not difficult to understand, but it's things like the MSBU. And why do you want to know about an MSBU? Well, you really don't, but it's important for us because in '93 when we formed SAISSA, the county formed an MSBU. An MSBU is something like, and I always forget exactly the definition of an MSBU, but it basically is the assessment for improvements done in a particular geographical area of the district. When this part it's the county. Well, why is that important? And by the way, we qualify for that, but why is that important? Well, it's important because the interest generated on the debt that we're going to incur is tax exempt. It's municipal interest. So the bankers love that. That's good. And you love it because it's a lower interest rate. The second part is that the county gets to put the assessment on your income, on your real estate tax bill. So that's what's allowed by being an MSBU. Well, to be an MSBU, you have to have a special benefit. We do, because we're protecting the beach. And you have to have a fair and equitable apportionment. That's the sticky part from the standpoint is that we will go out and we hired since 1994, our first one, an outside independent economic firm that deals with MSBUs. The name of the company was Fishkind. It is now PFM. Same person works with us though. And they devised a formula so that they created a fair and equitable apportionment to allocating the assessment that it takes to do the renourishment on the beach. And there's a few things for that fair and equitable apportionment. First of all, they look at it every year. Every year there's a major impact. So every year we do renourishment, they look at it to make sure that it's still a fair and equitable apportionment. This year, they proposed a change. And the change related to the amount that we allocate to commercial. you'll see later on that everybody gets a piece of the action. Commercial gets some, that means Omni and the club, as well as the residential piece. In the past, we've always allocated an arbitrary 13.5% of the assessment to commercial. Well, the attorneys didn't like that this year. They got religion, whatever. They said you can't do that. That is arbitrary. So you have to have a method, a methodology to do it. So our guy went back to the drawing board and created a methodology using equivalent residential units, which kind of puts them on par with the way we do residential. So then they ran it again. And so now the commercial, instead of getting a 13.5% allocation, gets a 12.7% allocation, a decrease of 5%. But again, this is a pot. You have, if one goes up, one goes down. So what happens is that they go down by 5%, and that means the residential somehow has to come up by 5%. Well, we looked at this, and we feel that the people living on the beach, yeah, you guys, the ones that living on the beach, the ones that always get nailed for all the big amounts, your assessment went up $48 as a result of this calculation from 13.5% to 12.7%. And I'm using averages. You know, your particular house, I don't know what it's worth, but obviously the higher value houses are worth more than the lower value houses and get more of an assessment. So we did that. Okay, so that's kind of what that slide's all about, just to let you know that we made that change. This who pays what has been there forever. Since 1994, we've had the same methodology approach to who pays what. Both, as I mentioned, both residential and commercial pay. Everybody benefits to some degree. So there's amounts spread among everybody no matter where you're located. Then you get into the properties. Those properties that live on the beach, that are on the beach, oceanside, gets the highest allocation. The next highest allocation are the people that live east of A1A. The next goes to the west of A1A. And then the properties with the higher values get more of an assessment. That's been the fair and equitable apportionment from day one, and we still use it today. Okay, I'm going to just jump. Now I'm going to just jump down to this slide because you've all seen, well, those that have received the package. Excuse me, is there anybody here that has not received the package in the mail? We have about 3 or 4 that just mail, Bill? Hope so. Hope so. We hope it's the mail carrier. I would say that if you haven't received one by the end of this week, please contact Bill Moore, and we will arrange to have your packet sent to you. But anyway, we have an analysis that's on one page. I just did 3 slides. This is the analysis that was sent out, where we list assumptions, the top part, and then we listed the amounts. But I'm going to just jump to this slide here, and then we'll kind of come back to the assumptions. The just value is the property appraiser's estimate of your value for real estate tax purposes. So it's the market value of your residence. Again, I'm going to talk about residence. Commercial also gets this allocation, but nobody's here is representing the commercial. Now we have 2 lines. We have with cost sharing and without cost sharing, and then we have the neighborhood. We call them neighborhoods that we talked about before. Oceanfront, east of A1A and west of A1A. Well, with cost sharing, we've never had this situation before. We're getting the money all up front, so to speak, because it's been appropriated and gone to contract by the feds and by the state. We know what we're going to get, okay? But we haven't got it yet. And the only way you get it is if you spend the money. So what we have to do is that we have to go to a bank, and we have to say, we need money to build the Renourishment. And they'll say, okay, what do you need? So we say, well, here's what we'd like to have. We'd like to have an arrangement kind of like a line of credit or a construction loan. Everybody's built a house. You get the money when you need it. So what we hope to do, we think we can do this, we'll go through, we'll borrow the money, we'll pay the vendor. The vendor will give us the canceled check to prove that we've paid them. Then we have to go to the state and say, Mrs. State, we've spent the money, we want the reimbursement. They will say, okay, we will give you the money, we will take the money, and then we will pay off the debt that we borrowed. We'll reduce the debt that we borrowed in the first place to pay the vendor. Well, there's a schedule. Now that sounds very complex. Well, in a way it is complex, but it's estimable. And that's what we did for this first approach of with cost sharing. I can't read it. With cost sharing, the money has come in from the grant money to pay it down. At the end of the year, again, we're starting in early May, 10 weeks, done by the end of the year. By the end of the year, we'll have had it paid down to about $9.7 million, and that'll be over. We're doing a 9-year loan in total, so that'll be over the remaining period of that loan. And so that's with cost sharing. And we've done that analysis. We've gone line by line, when we have to make the payments, how can we get the money, and when we go back up to assumptions, I'll comment something else on that. But then, by the way, the county, we usually operate through the financial advisor to the county. He's a very important person because he or she gives us guidance as to how we ought to structure our loans, what we ought to ask for in the banks, helps us behind the scenes. Well, unfortunately, he unexpectedly passed away. So in the county, as of today, and maybe today they have one, does not have a financial advisor. So we have not been able to sit down with the financial side of the county. We've met with many county officials, and we've met with a bank, so to get some idea that what I'm telling you is certainly doable, but we haven't met with the financial advisor. We will be doing that very soon as they have one. Anyway, so we haven't met with the financial advisor. So without cost sharing, there is a possibility, not likely, we think the with cost sharing is likely, but there is a possibility that the bank may say, I know you say you're getting the money from the county, from the states, from the state and the Fed, but we're not really 100% sure that you're going to get it in a timely fashion, and so therefore, we'll loan you the money, but we'll loan you $20 million, the cost of the project. That's what we'll loan you. So, while we do not think this is likely, we have to at least tell you that there is this possibility that we may not be able to structure the loan under that cost-sharing scenario that I just mentioned, and we may have to structure the loan of the first-year loan would be $20 million, and then obviously the money that we receive from the state at that time would go against the outstanding balance, and the second-year assessment would be different, would be much, much lower. In the cost-sharing analysis, the assessment is the same year after year after year. The assessment on the cost sharing is about $1.5 million a year. If you went to the $20 million, it'd be $3 million a year. Big numbers, big changes. That's why we put the 2 columns in. We think it's cost sharing. That's the way we're betting. I need to tell you that I don't want you to, if something happens and it doesn't go the way we plan it, I don't want you to tell me that I didn't tell you that there is that possibility that we could go to the without cost sharing scenario. But we don't think so. Anyway, how do I go back? Can you go back? This guy here? Oh, there we go. These are the assessment. This is all on the handout sheet that you have or will have. Again, we've talked about all this 9-year amortization interest rate, collection fees, there's a 10% state required fees that goes into this calculation. So there's all that. This is what we did. The interesting point, one takeaway from here, as I mentioned to you, the annual debt is $1.5 million. The state and federal grants, we've seen the $11.2 million. Again, we pay the vendor, we get the receipt from the vendor that we paid it, and then we run to the state and we say, okay, state, give us the money. Well, in past practices, we've done this, obviously, in the past, it's taken about 30 days to get the money from the state. Well, in this calculation, we've said, we need a little buffer in here. Let's go 60 days. 90 days, excuse me. We went 90 days. 30 is what we've experienced, but we went 90 days to be a little bit, have a little bit of a contingency in there in case the state doesn't pay us the way we think they'll pay us. And so in the Fed, usually we get the Fed in about 90 days. Well, we've gone 6 months with the Feds because we don't trust them. We don't trust them as much as we trust the state, that they will give us the money. So we've factored in a bit of a contingency, and all this affects, if you think it through, it affects the interest that you pay because we'll have the debt outstanding for a longer period of time. So the interest will be a little bit more. So, but again, that's what arrives at the debt service of $1.5 million a year. And that's the 9.7, I think I mentioned that. And then that's the $3 million. Okay, that was that one. Hopefully people have an understanding. Okay, the types of assessment. Yes, there are two. And we've had some of these questions by email. There's the capital assessment, is the one we just talked about. That's called capital assessment. It's the way SAIS cap. That's what shows on your real estate tax bill. It's a separate line item. A next line item, by the way, the comments I want to make under there is that you haven't had one of those since 2015. Why? Well, because the debt in 2011 was over 8 years. That would have taken you to 19. However, we got money from the state. We got it 5 months into the project. Here, we're getting it at the beginning of the project. Last Renourishment, we got it 5 months into the project. We used the money to pay off the remaining capital assessment. So you had none. So the last one you paid was 2015. Okay, the 2021, that 1.5 million that's allocated to everybody based on that neighborhood concept will go on your real estate tax bill in November of 2021. There is a second line item on your bill, real estate tax bill, and that's called the maintenance. Maintenance assessment runs about $400,000 a year. It's accumulated. The costs, the major costs are the monitoring services that Al mentioned before. Every year they go out and they take a look at the beach to see where we are and report back to the people that give us permission to run the permit, to have the permit. And so it's administrative costs of SAISSA, it's permitting costs, but basically it's monitoring costs. And that's why it's so much less than the capital cost. But it is a cost, and so you'll have two lines. And you currently are receiving a maintenance assessment on your tax bill. All right. You've probably asked this question to yourself many times. And we've talked about it at the board level many times. There's no question that we have a robust beach. No question about it. And the reason is because we've done everything that we've done since 1994. And we want to keep the robust beach. So what we look at is what additional factors should we take into consideration as to why we should do the beach in 21. And you've seen the engineers' estimates about where that design beach is going to be. And again, we have a whole year to go. And so you have some idea of the impact of the erosion on our design beach. Well, in the past, we've renourished after 8 years, 9 years. This time it'll be 10 years, 10 years with 2 hurricanes, long period of time. Al mentioned the recreational space. One of the really important items is down kind of at the bottom, and maybe I should have put this up top, is the state money will expire, we think, potentially expire in June of 2022. Can we get an extension? Maybe. Do we want to take a chance? No. The second is the future grant applications will apply a different criteria. Right now, the criteria for going to the state saying we want money is that there's a ranking system. And Al's very helpful in getting us the highest possible ranking that we can get. But it's kind of a black and white. If you have this, then you get 2 points, and that helps your ranking. If you have this, it's 2 points. There's really not that much subjective about the ranking system. Well, we ranked in 19 when we asked for this money. number 2 in the state. There were 25 to 30 inlets and beaches and other people asking for money on that list, and we were number 2. Well, that's awesome. Now, to be open, everybody got the money this last time because the state had the money. $50 million they gave to the beach people. Well, but we were still number 2, and we got one of the most amounts, the highest amounts, if I use right English. So that's great, and if we kept that system, we'd feel comfortable that we'd be back up into that top tier and asking for money. However, the state has come out with a proposed change, and that proposed change is to base the giving of money, you're saying a better word from giving, the allocation of the money to people that have the most economic benefit from the expenditure. The state believes there's economic benefit from renourishing beaches. They did an analysis that says in total there's like about a 5-to-1 ratio. That means there's 5 and 1% market value to 5 times the cost that they spend on beaches. Well, they're going to ask each individual county, beach inlet, beach, anybody asking for money, they're going to ask us to run a calculation as to why it's economic benefit, why there is an economic benefit to get the money from the state to renourish our beaches. Well, we think we can do that, but we're concerned that the guys down south, the big areas, big economic impact, might be able to present a little bit better case than we can up here in Nassau County. Look, this is speculation at this time, but it is an issue and it is out there, and it's something that went into the consideration of whether or not we should do the renourishment in 21. In addition to all the other, to the engineering reasons for doing it, there's money reasons as to why we believe that 2021 is the right year to do it. All right, these next 2 slides, I showed them at the other meetings. They're my favorite slides. This is, what is this one? This is Villano Beach. Villano Beach is just on the other side of Ponte Vedra, one of our beaches, right? Well, you see where the sand is, right? See, it's right there by the building. Okay, this picture was taken by the FDEP, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Environmental Protection. They took this picture and they used this in a series of presentations around the states as to what an engineered beach can do, which is, oh, lo and behold, us. We're the engineered beach. So they took this picture and they compared it to that picture, and they used it in all their presentations around the state, and it's kind of like the picture that's worth 1,000 words. They have no beach left, damage to upland property, damage to their buildings. We're okay. But again, we're okay because the way the Category 3 hit the beach. If we get a Category 5, ladies and gentlemen, and it hits the beach directly, it's a whole different ballgame. But we don't. We don't have one. Okay. That's the summary. Excuse me. This is the stuff that should have been in that package, and I apologize for the mail service. I'm not getting it to you. There's on the right, on my right, your left, I guess, is the petition that I'm asking you to sign. We need to get that to the county. We'd like to get it to the county in the next couple of months. Yeah, I do. Thank you, Al. Excuse me. Thank you. Ah, much better. Okay. Now we get into the fun part that everybody wants to say. Before, we're going to have microphones that will be given to the people that have questions. But I got one question from my friend and buddy by email, and that's Jeff Clear. Jeff and I have known each other for many years, play poker. And Jeff says, I'm not sure, what is SAISSA going to do to provide decent access to our beaches? We all know that there's an access issue to our beaches. We all know that there's not enough accesses to the beach. We know that. And the AIPCA knows that, as was discussed at their meeting on Friday. And if Tom wants to give us a half an hour report on what they're talking about, he's certainly willing and capable of doing that, although we don't think that he wants to do that at this point in time. But the point that I'm trying to make is that this is an AIPCA issue. This is a sanctuary issue. This is a, excuse me, this is a retreat issue. This is not, unfortunately or fortunately, it is not a SAISSA issue. We are in the business of protecting the market value of your property by restoring the beach when necessary. Our charter does not allow us to basically do anything else. And that's why I made you to please take a look at the purpose of what SAISSA is all about. So, while I personally do support a robust access to the beach, because I hope everybody gets to go on our fantastic beach, our goal is to maintain the market value of the properties and not provide for access to the beaches. So that's the first question. That's my answer, our answer, not mine. Answer. So now I'm going to call on Jeff to ask even more questions as it relates to access on the beach. Jeff, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, sir.
We need a microphone.
Thank you, sir. My name is Jeff Clear. I live at 5 Juniper Court. Drew, I'd like to thank you and all your associates for the fantastic work that you do on our behalf. Certainly evidenced today, but I know you've worked hours and hours and will work hours and hours. So thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Secondly, I'd like to say that I am absolutely 100% in favor of beach renourishment. And now, I think your presentation on 2021 is compelling. However, I'd like to offer a slightly different perspective on what you just stated. Just my hearing aid. First of all, I looked closely at the purpose slide that you put up at the very beginning, and it includes the following words: enhance the beach system. I choose to interpret those words to mean, and it could include, I know this is not what you just said, but it could include support. Notice I don't say lead or broker or anything like that, simply support the community's efforts to improve beach access. So my specific question is, will you and your SAISSA associates, in the best interests of our community, support, actively and officially support, the efforts of others, especially the AIPCA board, as they seek to develop ways to improve beach access? And if called upon, will you provide reasonable assistance to those efforts?
Oh, thank you, Jeff. The last part, if called upon, provide reasonable assistance. It's your money. It's not my money. And we assess you. We allocate that $1.5 million to enhance and build the beach to what we think is appropriate level. So it's your money. And I don't know what you want me to do with your money other than to restore the beach. If you want me to recommend to our board that we consider involving that money to do other things. As far as support, I personally, and I think, I'm not sure this is what the county wants us to do, because you're going to remember, we're the project manager for the county. I don't know if the county wants me to deviate from the charter to start getting into areas where I don't think we should be in. So I'm not sure that the county would want me to do this. And second of all, I haven't talked to the board, but I personally, and I think everybody, if you talk to them, would support the fact that we need more access to the beach. So, you know, if you take my SAISSA hat off, yes, I do certainly support that and would do whatever I can outside of SAISSA, but I'm just a little concerned that the resources of SAISSA should not be devoted to dealing with the access to the beach. But, you know, I'll tell you what I'll do. At the next board meeting, I'll run it by everybody and see what they say.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. All right, now, Bill, all these hands that are going up, I need you. Oh, you're there with a mic? Okay.
Yes.
So let's go. We have one over here. There was one. You can ask me the question. I'll get it to the right person. Is that Ron?
Yes.
It is Ron. Hi, Ron. Ron needs a microphone.
Thank you, Drew.
You're welcome, Ron.
Beach access is one issue. I submit that your purpose here is having a beach to which to have access.
Nicely said, thank you.
Two questions. Two questions, how's that? Firstly, for Dr. Browder, and probably both, and they're very different questions. Your perspective went back to 1984, and we saw the consequences of beach erosion. This has been occurring for centuries. Do we have any view of what this island looked like 100, 200, 300 years ago on the south end to get a feel for what we can expect from this type of erosion? Secondly, you saw how you gave us an indication of how effective mechanical intervention was at the state park by putting in a spine of some type. Is that something we should consider in the future to slow down the erosion and the implications of having it renourish?
Okay, Al, do you want to take those? I don't know where you are, but.
To answer the first question, there is a historical record that runs back probably 150 years with reasonably accurate surveys, and you get an indication of the conditions of the beach. Amelia Island itself used to extend farther south than it does today into Nassau Sound. Nassau Sound was located roughly where it is today, but the map history gives us indication of cyclical erosion and accretion at the south end of the island. With the introduction of the structures that were placed in 0405, we've halted some of that fluctuation and stabilized the island. So in the near to intermediate term, 50 to 100 years, the position of the island will stay roughly where it is, but it still has the tendency to want to erode. In an era of rising seas, obviously we're fighting on that end versus getting any help on the issue of sea level changes. So there is no reasonable expectation for a rapid increase in the erosion rate or really a rapid decrease in the erosion rate. The beaches on the ocean front, to a certain extent, can keep up with sea level rise up to a certain degree. It'll be areas like this in the back where your sea level rise will catch you. But in terms of the beach nourishment program, any dramatic change in the game plan going forward, we wouldn't envision would come up. To get to your second question about additional structural stabilization, yes, you can pursue additional structural stabilization farther up the beach. This is not the first time this question has come up. When feasibility studies are done to determine what's the best beach management plan, doing nothing, nourishing the beach, or intervening with structures of various forms is always part of the discussion. Extending the breakwaters would be, or adding groins to the beach is a certain question that you can evaluate economically. You can also try to evaluate it aesthetically or environmentally. Some of the structural alternatives that we can use near the inlet, for example, we would not be allowed to use on the open coast for problems of intervention with nesting sea turtles, shorebirds, things of that nature. But yes, you can look at all sorts of alternatives to any extent. Again, just keeping in mind that just because you want to do something one particular way, you may not get permits to do it. Structural intervention moving northward up the beach becomes more and more expensive. One, because you need more and more and more structures, but two, you're also building in deeper water, structures get bigger and more expensive. So it becomes a bit of an economic issue. At this point, as long as sand is reasonably available at the inlet or wherever we may find it, probably beach nourishment remains your most economical alternative.
We have a, oh, yes, I'm sorry. Buddy wants to say something? It's working, I think, buddy. I know.
I should share this with them.
No, Norm, I was not here 150 years ago. But I do want to say that part of our success with the Navy, with the Corps, has been because of a study done in 1970 by a young engineer named Eric Olson. That's when I first met him. And what he found, that under Chapter 111 of the federal statutes, that if the Corps has something they've created that becomes deteriorated and then causes more erosion, And so what they did is they built the jetties back in the 1800s. I wasn't there. And they have let them deteriorate. What they did is they put logs in the ground and then put rocks in the middle of that. And then, of course, over time, the logs deteriorated and the rocks fell down. So the current then makes a sharp right turn and comes and eats away at the north end. And we have proved to the Corps over time, it also contributes to the south end erosion as well. Now, when we're dealing with the Navy, they and the Corps spent $5 million to prove that we were wrong, because we said that when they start dredging Kings Bay, they're going to starve us and steal our sand, because they were going to throw it out in the ocean. They weren't going to put it on the shore, and that's when we got embroiled with the Navy. In fact, I drafted a lawsuit, went to the Secretary of the Navy and said, we're going to do this, we're going to sue you if you don't help us out with this. And so after lots of negotiation, they agreed to that we are indeed right and they're wrong, because their 5 million 28 volume study had the wrong benchmark. They started at the wrong point. And we proved to them that the whole thing was erroneous because they started at the wrong baseline. But to answer your question, we have utilized these structures to show that there is fault by the federal government on our erosion, and if they were to dredge at Kings Bay or out the channel, they're starving us of sand. And so they've accepted that premise, and over time, that's why we've been successful in getting done what we've gotten done. So, and as far as the growing is concerned, the growing that Al's talking about, 1,600 feet out in the water, we got sued over that. And we were sued by every environmental group you could ever think of, even the thing called the Surf Boys of America or something, the Surf Riders of America. We had all the other known environmental groups, Audubon, all of them sued us. And they had an engineer who testified erroneously after 4 days of our presentation of our case with our great experts, Eric Olson and Associates. They put on an expert, and he had the wrong permit. We had an amended permit that he hadn't read, because those those jetties out there that we placed in the growing that we placed, it was designed so that sand slips through them and goes and doesn't starve the foraging area of the pilted plover. Now, you aren't concerned about the pilted plover, but they were quite concerned, and we won the case. We dismissed it because their expert had the wrong number. Now, when we saved the park, we saved 210 species of birds, nesting area, and the poor pilted plover is still doing okay. So I've given you too lengthy of an answer, but yes, we have that structure has been a tremendous help to us because, as you know, and I'm talking about layman stuff here, not about, I certainly wouldn't ever think I could be as scientific as Al is, but you know, it's called shadowing of sand. So when the sand's moving, the littoral drift's moving down towards the growing, and it hits it, it sets back a reverberation and causes the sand to drop. The water drops the sand, and it builds up. That's called shadowing. And that we've been very successful at that. We got 65 acres of sand down there, a beach we'd never had before, because of that growing and that breakwater. So certainly, if you put those further down the beach, you get more and more of that. But at the current time, and we've looked at the money part, it is just not cost effective at all to do that. That was $12 million to build those two structures down there. Of course, we greatly benefited from a good friend of mine, Jim King, who was president of the Senate from Jacksonville, and Jim got us to $12 million. So that's why we are. And I'm sorry to take up so much time. I just want to give you a layman's perspective about that, okay?
There was another question. Bill?
Drew, I'd just like to ask you, the people that haven't received their packets, they would raise their hand and hold it up until I can get to them. I'll provide them my business card. They can call or email me. I'll write the information on the back. So.
Okay, but okay, please do that.
We have a speaker
But
over
I'm
here.
wondering
when
when
you're
these questions, though.
Yeah, I have a question for Al, I guess. And I
That's
was wondering what type of modeling or what type of impact studies you've done on the proposed new channel that you're talking about for the collection of the sand. What would that have on storm surge or tidal surge back here in the marsh on Walker's Creek, on both sides, the east side, the south side and north side? And would that be creating a situation where the tidal surge would actually be enhanced or exacerbated because of the new channel?
Yes, the slide that I showed there briefly, the numerical modeling slide, one of the reasons we did that was to look at that very thing, was to study what's called the tidal prism, the volume of sand that comes in and out of the inlet on any given tidal cycle. When we proposed to look at the channel, that's one of the concerns, is that you can imagine if you open it up too far, you invite more water in than what previously came in. So part of what we study there along the bridge, which is all landward of where this work is going to occur, we run the numbers, we run what's called ADCP surveys to actually measure the currents coming in during tidal cycles. By opening up this channel, because the channel does not extend through the bridge and up into the estuary, we are only opening up another pathway across the ebb shoal. So it actually lessens the flow in certain other areas of the ebb shoal, but has no measurable effect on the difference in the amount of water that actually comes into the inlet. Passing the bridge is sort of the local landmark. So we wanted to make, for the reasons you raise exactly, we want to make sure we don't increase the tide range coming into the estuary, because we don't want to create any more of a problem than you already have back here. So yeah, that's what the numerical model does. The model itself is called Delft 3D. I don't know, get into the nuts and bolts of it, but it does quite a few things, and that's one of the big areas we look at. What are the tidal elevations with our project and without our project?
We have another question, this gentleman here.
I'm Walton Rogers. I think this is on, yes. And I'm concerned about the turtles. You mentioned something about provisions we made for the turtles. According to Google, the first turtle hatched on the first turtle nest on Amelia Island was May the 9th in 2018. And I'd want to make sure that there's some provision. What is your provision for satisfying these turtle needs? And I'm hoping you're not going to leave it up to the contractors, because they have a different objective than we do.
Bill, do you want to answer this one?
Is it going to be monitored, in other words?
Yes, there will be. My understanding there is. Bill?
I'm sorry, I wasn't really
It has to do
listening.
with the turtles.
You want me to get it?
Yeah, you got it?
I got it.
Oh, he's got it,
I
never
got
mind.
it. Yes, sir. Very, very important question. Both of the permits that we will get, the DEP permit and in particular the Army Corps of Engineers permit, will have terms and conditions, several pages worth, that relate directly to the protection of nesting sea turtles and the nests themselves. We build in sea turtle nesting season, as Drew mentioned, for economic reasons, but also for just straight constructability reasons. But what we will do starting the beginning of nesting season, and I'm an engineer, not a biologist, I don't touch anything living because it never turns out well for me. We have Amelia Island Sea Turtle Watch, the folks who do the monitoring every year here. We coordinate and contract with them to do daily surveys beginning before nesting season starts. We give them the schedule of where our dredge operation is going to be down the beach, so they'll know where we're going to be working and where they can go. And they will look every morning for sea turtle nests. And if they find one that is within the range of our work for 70 days, that's how long they give them for the gestation period and hatching out of the nests, they dig them up and relocate them. There are places down in Amelia Island State Park that are allotted for permission to relocate nests. There are places up north of our project where they can relocate nests. This is what the exact process that was done in 2011 when we did the last renourishment. They relocated, I want to say something on the order of 30 nests that we got during that particular season. The relocated nests actually do very, very well. There are very strict guidelines. You got to dig them up that day. You got to get them placed that day. They do very, very well because they get placed in planned strategic areas, that particularly nests that get laid too close to the water's edge might not last the season, Well, we don't have that problem because they'll relocate them and place them in a safer area. But yes, there are quite a few precautions that are taken for sea turtle nesting. We are allowed to pump at night within a very specific and short range. Typically each day, the contractor works and presses down the beach to a certain point, and then they kind of hunker down with a plan to work overnight only in a very specific area. They have monitors overnight, and if a turtle comes up in their work area, and it's like Murphy's Law, I've had it happen on just about every project I've worked on, they have to shut down. They have to stop. They have to call the Turtle Patrol folks. Turtle Patrol will come and watch, and they'll relocate the nest. So there are precautions taken for nighttime operations as well. It is a bit of a two-edged sword. I mean, you as a collective community, when that dredger shows up, you want them to go as fast as possible. Get in, get out, go home. Get off your beach, get out of your way, stop making noise, don't do anything. But you do have to deal with the turtle nest issue, and that's how they deal with it.
Somebody else is monitoring at night as the dredge operates.
No, it's part of the Amelia Island Sea Turtle Watch folks. I mean, I've never had it happen, never had a problem, and it's a big, big, big deal.
Hi, I'm Kate Lagar. I live at 24 Salt Marsh Drive, and I want to return to the issue of beach access and what Jeff brought up. And I agree, I've been a supporter of SAISSA since I moved here in 2002. I live west of A1A, so that's relevant to what I want to talk about. I agree with you, Drew, that it's not SAISSA's job to solve the beach access problem. Your job is to make sure we have a beach. What I do take issue is, it isn't within your responsibility, is you're using a formula for the assessments that's 25 years old, if I understand correctly, excluding the commercial part. And my issue is I moved here in 2002, and I was also here in 2011. Beach access in 2002, and I live west of A1A, was radically different than it is today. And to use an assessment that's 25 years old based on beach access patterns that were available then versus now, I think is not fair and equitable. Now, we could get beach access solved and then maybe we could go back to the formula. But I don't think that using the formula that SAISSA is using now represents a fair and equitable formula for those of us that don't live on the beach. The two things that have happened that, in my view, have been since 2002 at least, which is when I moved here. You had the bankruptcy, and out of that came a lot of action between the resort and the club to restrict beach access dramatically. The second thing that happened is a number of condos along the beach restricted beach access dramatically. Now, when I want to walk my dog late in the day on the beach, I can't get there unless I park illegally in a condo parking lot. And so why should I be paying the same proportionate amount that I paid in 2002 and 2011? That's my question for the SAISSA board, and I think the assessment formula is in your purview.
Thank you, Kate. Kate, am I still here? First of all, the assessment is not based on access. You confused me a little bit. The assessment, the neighborhood methodology, first of all, was developed 25 years ago. It's reviewed every time we do a renourishment to make sure that it still produces a fair and equitable allotment to the people that live in those areas. But it's based, excuse me, on the protection of the market value of those houses. Has anything to do with whether the people living in those houses can get to the beach. It's strictly to do, we think that the market value is impacted more so by if you're on the beach, because you have the waves and the wind and everything else. And so therefore you ought to pay more for that protection and all the way through. And that's why we got those neighborhoods. And it's interesting, I asked the guys this year, you know, you've used this model, you keep coming back and saying it's the right model, do me a favor and go to other beaches and see what they use, so on. And his interesting, after him doing that, he came back and said, it's interesting, Drew, they use us as the model for what they're doing. So that gives me a little bit of a good feeling that what he's doing is, even though it's 25 years old, is still the appropriate, methodology to use in this case. So again, Kate, the assessment that we develop has nothing to do with the access to the beaches. It has strictly to do with the impact of a storm could do to the market value of your house located where it's located, if that makes any sense at all. But we'll talk about it as a board. We'll bring all that stuff up, and we'll make sure everybody's happy. Okay, now, yes, is that Ron?
I'm Ron Cheeley. I live in the residence, and this is a technical question for Dr. Browder. When we moved into our home in 2015, our boardwalk was level with the beach. And then we had Irma and we had Matthew. And now Mother Nature has created like a 5-foot dune, a dune line along there, and then there's another smaller dune line that's being created. That appears to be a very positive thing from a standpoint of protection of the home. I guess I'm just curious, how did that dune form? Because it was not there in 2015.
What you'll see, particularly in your stretch of the beach and in a little bit down towards the sanctuary, when Matthew, in particular when Matthew occurred, in the picture that was shown in the presentation, there was a great deal of overwash from the storm. A lot of the sand that was on the dry recreational beach berm, which even after 5 or 6 years when Matthew hit, was still in its engineered shape. A lot of that sand got shaved off during the storm. A lot of it was deposited offshore or out of our limits, but a lot of it was also deposited over top of the existing sea oats that were there. So that is actually a positive thing for the upper portion of the beach, while it's a sacrificial thing for the engineered portion of the beach. And this is actually a pretty common problem that beach nourishment projects have all over the Southeast, really. If you have a mature project that's been built once or twice and you're in the maintenance business, as we are now, what you eventually get is the upper portion of the beach grows sea oats, nice pictures, looks great, gets higher in elevation, which is fantastic for protection against storms. But the recreational beach still continues to erode at its typical annual average rate. We're not doing anything to affect the wave climate offshore, so that erosional stress is still there, but the upper part of the beach has benefited nicely. So eventually, we get the sea oats that grow out, the dunes then grow because those sea oats capture windblown sand, they capture overwash sand in storm events too. But then the recreational beach continues to retreat back at normally its typical rates. So what you get is a real compression of the recreational space in between, but the beach gets narrower and narrower and narrower. The dunes do grow. They're there for when, the next Matthew or the next event occurs, so you'll get some added bonus protection there as well.
Yeah,
But the important thing to take away here, the net volume, we as engineers doing beach nourishment projects look at the overall volume of sand that's in the system. The net volume still continues to operate on that typical annual average erosion rate. But yeah, we do have the upper part of the beach has been enhanced dramatically.
Yeah, at high tide, we really don't have much beach at all.
Well, and that's where you start to see that compression of the space. But the dunes are the big benefactors. You don't want anybody playing in there, obviously. One of the other downsides of this for birds and other habitat, the birds don't particularly like the vegetated areas because you can't see. So they don't see what's hiding in the vegetation either. So they get compressed a little bit in their space as well.
Okay, Ron? Any more? Another question, Richard?
Richard DeFaro. I actually live in Osprey Village, which doesn't benefit directly from the beach renourishment, although as members of the community it does. Drew, this is a wonderful presentation. Each of you has done a terrific job. I was wondering, will the slides be available on your website?
I think they're already on the website.
They
Yeah.
are? Will be in about 48 hours.
48.
Okay.
Plus a live stream of this.
And then I had a question on when is the snapshot taken of how the costs are allocated? I mean, you go through essentially an adjustment of the just value in the fall. So if you're doing a 2021,
Yeah.
do you,
Bill, when is the property appraiser used for the just value? What's the list, the roll, the tax roll?
we use whatever role the county has at the time, so they modify their role throughout the year, reappraising properties. They don't do the entire county or the entire area of the south end of Amelia Island at the same time they do areas. And over a period of time, they adjust all of the values. And of course, just value is used because when you pay your taxes, if you homestead your property, you're paying a different rate than if you don't homestead your property. So to be fair to all property owners, several years ago, the board decided to use just value, which is the market value of the property, which is determined by the property appraiser. So whatever is on the property appraiser's website at the time we do the assessment is the one that's used.
and then
Did I answer it?
Drew,
Yes?
I was wondering, roughly, it looks to me like beachfront pays 100% if you use that as your standard. East, but of A1A, but not on the beach, is about 85%. And on the marsh side is 75%. Is that the approximate
Could
discounts?
be, I don't know. But
Are the
that-
formulas,
That's our goal. Our goal is to have them pay more, yes.
okay.
I don't know what the percentage
Is
is.
the formula available to the
Yeah,
community?
anything is available to anybody. so-
Can you publish it? And
Yeah,
also
it's-
publish how is the commercial?
Well, there's
calculated?
hang on. We have all the slides in this deck, right?
Should be in the back.
Yeah. Hang on.
You'll have to bring it up.
I don't?
No, go ahead and go through.
It should be right here. Hang on. These are slides that, you know how you keep slides in the back? That's kind of a neat slide.
I think it should be in there.
I know it is, but I'm looking at these slides. Aha! That's the formula.
And how does it work for commercial?
Same way.
So if,
Same way. It's updated annually by neighborhood, commercial units treated as equivalent residential units, wherever the commercial is located. Most of the commercial's on the beach. Certainly, Omni's mostly on the beach. They do the greatest percentage of the allocation to commercial is Omni. I mean, significantly greater.
so it's the just value of the Omni oceanfront property.
Yeah. And then you do 60% on a base rate. And somebody had asked me, but it was a question by email, as to why the amounts are not proportioned to each other. And I don't know if this is, if you look at what's in the oceanfront, west of A1A and east of A1A, they're not proportional, I mean, because the first cut of the way we do the calculation is that you take 60% and you allocate it among everybody. Bill, am I saying that right?
Yes.
Yeah, among everybody. So everybody gets the same, I think it's like $345. So every house, no matter where you're located, gets a base rate of $345. And then it builds up from there, depending upon where you're located and the market value of your house. But that's essentially how this thing works. So, Richard, we get this, the board gets the final calculation, and we get a copy of everybody's property, and we can go through, and I know I do, and I'm sure Bill does, and other board members probably do, at least for their house. They go through and they do the calculation. But you're welcome to, you can use my house as a calculation.
There's a judgment in how you're doing the allocation between oceanfront,
Yeah.
east of A1A, and the marsh side. And the point that Kate was making is that judgment is not just value, because just value is simply the
No, it's
baseline
location.
formula. It's location.
Yeah.
And location is also relevant to beach access. So if the value of your home is affected by your beach access, then SAISSA needs to use some judgment whether
formula that was used 25 years ago is as relevant today where there's been restriction on beach access. That's the question that Kate is putting to this SAISSA board and asking whether or not it doesn't need to be reevaluated in light of the restrictions that have been put on access to the beach contractually by the commercial property owners, Omni and the club, and by condos which have closed off beach access. The Dunes Club pool and beach access is gone for anybody anymore unless you're an owner of those condo units. So I think the important question for SAISSA is, does that need to be reevaluated in light of today's restriction on beach access?
I can do two things. One, I don't think it has any impact whatsoever in the, and I know we keep saying it's a 25-year-old method, but it's a method that at least the people who do this, and they're independent people, this economic study, believe is the best method to achieve, if you go back to the MSBU, a fair and equitable distribution. And whether you use 60, 40, 70, 15, that's just the methodology to get to what you said earlier, 100, 75, 50, whatever the numbers that you used. But I will do this. I will talk to the guy who does this because it's him, it's not us. And I will mention this access issue to him and see if he believes that there should be any additional refinement as a result of restrictions on access to the beach from some of these other areas, from these areas. I will do that.
Drew,
Bill?
might I add that the market conditions of the property really are that adjustment. If Kate, living in her house on Salt Marsh Drive, feels it's worth less, she sells it for less, then that's how that factor is taken into consideration in the model and the economic value of the properties.
Good one, Bill. Thank you. And
Ken Dewey, Ship Watch. It's very interesting. I keep hearing about access to the beach. Yet, just south of the plantation, before you get to the residence and the rest, is a Nassau County beach access. It has a very nice parking lot. It has a walkway over the sand dune. I have looked at that every July 4th for the last 3 years. There's always parking space available. I really don't understand the big problem to the south. Now, if you want to go where Omni is, that's another story. They've blocked you off.
yeah, thank you for your comment. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think we've heard enough about access questions, but thank you for that additional comment. Are there any other questions related to what we're doing here?
I do. Kim Atchison, Captain's Court. I have two questions. The assessment, how many years is that anticipated to be on the tax bill?
9 years?
And the second one is, this is all predicated upon getting 50%, better than 50% approval from the county.
Yes.
What kind of challenge? I'm a new owner here. I don't know.
Yeah.
Is this going to be tough? 50 plus sounds strong to me.
Last year, we stopped counting when we got to 50, last Renourishment, we stopped counting when we got to 50.1. So we don't really know, how many would have really voted for it. My gut reaction is that we have about 2,600 voting members. I say voting, but petition signing people. To get 1,300 plus, I think it's something we have been concerned about. I think that's why we do meetings like this, why we send out lots of literature. Is it keeping me up at night? No, but I do worry about it, and I want to continue to, say the word as to why we're doing what we're doing. But at the end of the day, I think we'll get it. I do. I have heard a lot of good, positive things. I'm hoping that the meeting is not full today, because there's all these other people that said, yeah, we support it, we have no questions, we have no problems, and they stayed home in the rain. So I feel good about this. Any other question? Oh my goodness, a neighbor. Hi, Jack.
I just want to
thank yourself and the team for, over the years, your predecessors as well. I know Norm and many others, Bill, have been involved. In behalf of the community, I hope we continue to support aggressively the actions on a timely basis, and I thank you.
Well, thank you, Jack. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Carl Anderson, I live over at Oak Point. One of the obvious questions that keeps getting put off someplace, those of us that do live on the other side of the new freeway that's coming through here, I would sort of suspect that someone would be working on an improvement to beach access. And what I'm hearing here is that it's like a pass-off to a pass-off. Someone asks a question and you're not responsible. Someone over here, and that's not responsible. And we live over here, and how do we get to the beach? We don't take our car to go to the parking lot. We walk down the end of the court, and we view there no passage, unless you walk about a quarter mile, not much, but you can do it. I could do it. But there is no access unless you go into the beach lot, not the beach, but the park lot down there. And meanwhile, I support the erosion effort. Don't misunderstand me. I come from Virginia Beach. I lived on the ocean for 20 years. I recognize the erosion problem. I recognize all that. But we also had a beach access in every block. And I'd like to point out that up in Fernandina, you also have beach access provided by the city that runs down all the way along. People have an easy access to the beach. I remember during my real estate days, followed my Navy days, but I was selling a place that was a condo, and we had access to the bay, and I had to take someone down there to walk them to the bay because they couldn't find the area. But down here, the ocean is a big deal. It's a big deal. I live on the golf course. I love that. That's a big deal too. But nevertheless, the access to the ocean is going to become more and more important. And who's ever supposed to be working on it should be working on it. And there should be a reciprocal plan that you can put up. And these are all of the access points that we have going over to that area.
Well, thank you for your comment. The only piece of that comment that I didn't like is your comment about passing off the question. The question was answered from the standpoint that it is currently not SAISSA's responsibility to deal with access to the beach. It's the AIPCA's responsibility.
I'm sorry.
And those comments should be directed to the AIPCA, not SAISSA.
I didn't direct it yet. You took it that way.
I did.
It's all a matter of perspective. It's all a matter of perspective. It's our money, it's our beach.
It is.
And it's our organizations. And I'm standing here because I've sat here now an hour and a half, and nobody has answered that question, or there's no plan.
Because there's no answer. There's no answer to that question from SAISSA. There is an answer from the AIPCA and Sanctuary and those people. But there's no answer. I did say I would go back and talk to the board about us to take that into consideration when we develop the formula. But that's as far as we can go. It is not our responsibility, sir.
I'm not questioning your responsibility or your approach to the thing. What I'm really saying is that we're being assessed a value. The people on this side are looking at it, at least from my perspective, looking at it, okay, I understand that. And we have other people here that are representatives. They don't have any plan. We faced 30 years,
I
as you
sense
use
your
as an
frustration.
example.
I do.
And then, but wait. 30 years later, what we've seen is a reduction of access to the beach. And 30 years later, the price has gone up and up and up to provide the beach. And so as an end result, I understand your perspective.
Okay. I sense your frustration. I do. But we're going to move on. Oh. Okay. We don't need to get into that. Actually, what you should do Tom won't like this. What you all should have done that have concern over the beach access, and it's a valid concern, and I do agree with that, is you should have withheld your payment on the $1,450 that you're paying to the AIPCA. If you want to make a statement, make the statement to who's got responsibility for it. Not to us, but to them. I'm sorry, Tom. I wasn't going to say it, and they just kept blasting me. I know. I'm sorry, Tom. Okay, are there any more questions? No, thank you all so much for coming. I do appreciate it. Thank you.